take it away. Producer for Here Arizona, Scott Bork.
All right. Hello, I'm Scott Bork. Like they said, I'm the producer for Here Arizona podcasts. Specifically, lately, I've been working on a series called Becoming a Veteran that works to address some of the root causes of veterans issues, specifically in Arizona. And I want to introduce our three panelists today. Our first one is Joanna Swett. She is a former staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. She served from 1998 to 2007, including tours of duty in Okinawa and Iraq. So welcome to Staff Sergeant veteran Joanna Swett. Our second guest is Signa Oliver. She served in the United States Army back in the 1980s in the artillery. After getting out of the Army, she joined the Phoenix Police Department and then went to law school and then went back into the Army as a Judge Advocate General officer. She worked basically as a prosecutor in court-martial cases. And then our third guest is Jessica Morell. She was a sergeant in the United States Army from 1997 to 2005. She served in Bosnia, Korea, Germany, and Iraq. So welcome to all three of you, and thank you all for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, welcome. What backgrounds. This is, I'm excited to hear everything you have to say. I want to start with a kind of a broad question, but all of you entered the military, it sounds like, when women were, I think it's fair to say, less integrated into the armed forces than they are today. And I want to just begin with a why question. You know, why did each of you take that path? What drew you to military service? Why don't you begin, Joanna?
Sure, thanks. I grew up a military brat. My dad was in the Air Force, so I lived the military family lifestyle. Nobody ever engaged me about the potential of joining the service, and it was not ever a thought in my brain. I was destined to be the next Mary Tyler Moore, and that was my future, going to the city. But some things changed in my life right after high school. I had a baby, my beautiful daughter, who's now 25. And I was kind of lost here in Arizona. I knew I didn't want to not do anything, which is what everybody kept telling me. It was like, your future is bleak. You're just a mom now. And one day, a friend of mine who I went to high school with, another woman, made the decision to join the Marine Corps. And I had never heard of a Marine coming from the Air Force Army lifestyle. And I went with her to what's called like a DEP pool meeting. And I became quite enamored by the institution of the Marine Corps, its prestige. If you ever see a Marine in their dress blue uniforms, it's just like out of this world. And I was already kind of an alpha personality. I was an athlete in school. And so they knew what to say to me at that time to really perk my interest. And so I found myself going down that pathway quite haphazardly.
Let's hear from you next, Signa. Can you tell us your story a little bit about how you got into military life?
Well, and thank you, JoJo, for your remarks. She's an amazing woman, by the way. Well, I'm a third generation military person. I am the first woman in my family to serve in the military, and always, had a great respect for those who served. My dad served. I have brothers that served. Grandfather served. So when I was in college, I needed, assistance with going to school. My mother was a nurse, and at the time, I wasn't eligible for any financial aid. So I thought, I can go in the military and, get the education I want, and then, further my career. I always wanted to be an attorney since I was about 8 or 9 years old. I was a judge in a courtroom case in the 3rd or 4th grade. So I had made my decision then. So I had to be educated to do that. So the first time I joined as an enlisted person, and I was a telecommunications specialist, and I had a top secret security clearance, and I was out in a hot rat rig in the middle of nowhere, listening to messages, and I was assigned to a field artillery unit here in Arizona. And that was a different experience for a little, Phoenix City girl. And then as Scott talked about when he was introducing us, so I was a police officer after that, was working for the police department, became an actual police officer for the city of Phoenix. And then at some point in time, I was married with 2 kids. I decided I'm not doing what I set out to do. I want to be, an attorney. So I quit my job and went to law school. And during our 3rd years, when you're, looking for a job, and we were in, I believe, Atlanta, and we were interviewing, and one of my best friends interviewed with the JAG Corps, the Army JAG Corps. And she's like, just interview with them. And I was like, well, I've already done about 6 years. I'm good. And I did actually talk to them. Well, they took me, not her, primarily because I was probably already acclimated, prior military service and a 3rd generation, Army person. So they took me, and it was an amazing experience. I got the opportunity to serve. We went to it's called Fort T. JAGSA, which is the JAG school for all of the armed forces on the campus of the University of Virginia. And I didn't know if anybody else in the Army knew about this, because those were like Air Force quarters, and Army is not used to that. So, and then spent a few months at Fort Lee, and then was shipped off to the home of the infantry, HUA, Fort Benning, Georgia, where half my career I was an administrative and civil law attorney, where I practiced before the EEOC, the Merit System Protection Board, and I was a special assistant U.S. attorney for the Middle District of Georgia. So I was a U.S. attorney representing the United States military. And the other half, I was a prosecutor, as Scott talked about. I prosecuted all kinds of criminal cases. I prosecuted the first HIV case in the United States Army and won, and got the biggest sentence that that judge had ever given in his career, and he was retiring. So I had an amazing career. I was afforded amazing opportunities, and I look back at that time and treasure that time. Thank you.
Thanks,
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, and so turn to you, Jessica, last for your kind of introduction to the military, and then we'll toss it to Scott for some questions after that.
Well, thank you for having me. I was born in a small town here in Arizona, Miami, Arizona, which is about an hour east of the Phoenix area. And I knew there was 2 things that I wanted to do in my life. I knew I wanted to travel, and I knew I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. And I needed help being able to do that. And so a few of my friends had joined right out of high school into the military. And for me, it was just an opportunity to take advantage of the educational benefits, as well as the opportunity to travel. And within the first year of joining the Army, I was deployed to Bosnia. So I was on my way right away, being able to see other parts of the world.
Wow, yeah, wow. Okay, so we want to talk next about, which I think logically makes sense, talk about training, right? Scott tells me that training changes you, and I'm going to toss this to him. I want to hear a little bit about your own experience in this, Scott, because you're also a veteran, and then we can hear from some of our panelists as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, so everybody who joins the military goes through training. They call it indoctrination because they are taking somebody who is a complete civilian and turning them into somebody who is ready to be in the military. So I'm curious, how did training change each of you? You each described kind of your life before the service. When you go through training, how did you come out differently? And so Joanna, I'll start with you, because we all know the Marines has the most significant, training, I would think.
Definitely. I think we had the longest training, and we call it recruit training, even not boot camp, because the Marine Corps likes to be, extra different. I would say that I probably had a very unique indoctrination experience because of how I was raised. So I have an immigrant parent. My mother is from Korea. And so her style of discipline my whole life prepared me for the Marine Corps, definitely. And then my dad, of course, having served in the Air Force and being a very regimented type of person, and he had served, starting in the 60s and went to Vietnam twice. So he had a very much different experience, even than those in garrison. So for me, going to training, the mental part and the aggression was okay for me. But what really changed me was the discipline, and then opening up and understanding what a real team mentality is. Having played organized sports, I had always been a part of teams, but the teams that you have are very far different. You have a far different goal, and your cohesion means everything, your survival even. And so that I think I thrived from a lot, coming from my childhood, seeming isolated or having a traumatic growing up experience versus my peers because of the cultural dynamics in my home. But it did very much change me. It also really reinforced a lot of the feminist ideology I had already had about what women could in fact do. And so I left boot camp extremely empowered and ready to take on the world.
All right, Signa, how about
Well, I was the youngest of five, and I was the very youngest of five. I was the oops kid, and I was very spoiled, came from a different background where I was spoiled and sheltered. And my entry into boot camp, I started at Fort Jackson, and we ended up in Fort Gordon, Georgia. And I was in shock at first, but I was always taught to be, try to be strong, even though I was pampered. And I went from this pampered little spoiled girl to a squad leader. We had, and this is basic training as an enlisted person, we had 4 companies, and one was a female only company at the time because it was in the 80s. And I became one of the leaders, one of the squad leaders. I was able to, pull on some inner strength that I had no idea that I had before. And to JoJo's point, I came out very empowered, very strong, very certain of everything I wanted to do and who I wanted to be. And the officer training was impactful as well because it was very different from the enlisted training. First and foremost, the different level of, respect that you get as an officer just because, you have a bar or a couple of bars on your collar was different. But it gave me a different perspective about the people I served with earlier and gave me a big respect in that officer training for the people I would be working with and commanding, which were the NCOs and enlisted people.
All right, thank you, Signa. And how about Jessica?
So very similar to both Signa and Joanna, it's the empowerment and really getting to the bottom of what I am made out of was really something that I learned about myself while I was in basic training. And I had the unique opportunity, kind of like what Signa is saying. I went in as an 18-year-old, served for 8 years, had a 15-year break in service, and then went back into the military at the age of 42 and went back to basic training again for the new job that I was being trained for. So when I went in the second time, now having 4 children and lived, a whole life, and going back into basic training, getting yelled at all over again, what I noticed differently was, number one, that I already knew what I was made out of. So the fear of what was going to happen was completely taken away from me. Not that it made it easier, and not that you ever get used to being yelled at. However, I knew what we were working towards. And so because of that, I really embraced the second experience. And I think it also helped that we were all having to wear masks. And so I could hide a lot of my giggling of some of just the absurdness of being yelled at by someone half my age. However, you know, I learned so much in that second experience, and what we learn about ourselves, you know, it stays with us. And so even though I certainly wasn't the fastest one in my class at the age of 42, I held my own and did what needed to get done because I knew I was made of that. Quitting wasn't an option. I had 3 teenage daughters watching my every move. You think I was going to come back home, not you know, succeeding at what I was sent to do. So that was really what I think changed most about me, was just the mindset that's carried me through the rest of my life.
Yeah. So I want to
Knowing
follow up. Yeah, sorry, Scott. Let me just jump in. I want to follow up with each of you real quickly on this because you each sort of talked about. I think even Joanna, you said this very like you came out of it more of a feminist, like your feminist ideology was brought forth. You found your own powers within yourselves. I wonder, like, if you can expand on that and just tell us about why. It seems odd because you're in this institution that, especially at the time, was not equal at all. Did you feel that, or did you feel like you could earn your place in it? Like, how did you come to a place where you felt more in touch with your feminism?
I think for the Marine Corps, when I joined, is a little bit different experience, maybe even for Signa and Jessica, in that just until last year, the Marine Corps kept women and men completely separated in that training cycle. Like you don't see each other. And so my experience going to Parris Island which is where they only trained women Marines at the time, at 4th Battalion, where my entire leadership and chain of command were female hats, except for when I went to a classroom, I might have a male drill instructor in there. But generally, it was this all woman environment. And so to see women on all different levels, at all different shapes, sizes, backgrounds, experiences, and just capabilities, and being able to watch that succinct growth in all of us from day one to that last day. And having grown up in the era that I grew up, where it was like, girls can never do what boys can do. Or if you do, then maybe you're just a little bit more exceptional. Or you can play girls sports, but then we'll organize you over here. And so everything was very separate. And the messages I always got growing up was that girls were just a little bit less than guys. And leaving boot camp, and I knew that to not be true, right? I was racing boys, I was beating them at sports, and I was like, I'm not the only one. And so graduating from boot camp and being around that many women and idolizing the women that trained me, and not having seen that anywhere in my life before, you know, where women had such power, such prestige, and honor in what they were doing. And it just solidified like those dreams that I had, that what I knew to be true is that women are, you know, this powerful force. And if, you know, we had the same opportunity, we might be further along than we really truly are. And so leaving that experience, I really did feel that through and through it, and tried to carry that on throughout my career as things changed, as I integrated, of course, and I got different messages. But in those moments, you couldn't tell me anything. I remember walking around on boot leave for 10 days straight with like tank tops, because I wanted everybody to see my muscles, you know, and see what I had become. And then to tell a man, or, you know, anybody that I was a Marine, you know, it just gave me a lot of power.
I want to toss this to Scott, because you also served in the military, but in a obviously from a different perspective. You know, what was it like? What were your perceptions, experiences of serving with women before, you know, everything sort of changed when Obama changed things and allowed women into combat units, et cetera?
Well, again, I'll say, you know, the military was probably 85-90% men, even when I was in the late 2000s, 2009 to 2014. And I remember distinctly going to the rifle range one day to qualify. And I struggled, I'd never really shot a rifle before. And I shot the minimum score to pass. And nobody really gave me a hard time. But I know that if a woman shot the minimum score to pass, she would probably get a pretty hard time about that. There are also, stories about, if a man got hurt right before deployment, very few people would say, oh, he's just getting hurt to get out of deployment. But if a woman got pregnant, even 8 months before a deployment, there would be the whole, oh, she just got pregnant to get out of deployment. So, I'm curious, what was it like for you all being in that hypermasculine environment where, you probably had to work harder to prove yourself? And, Signa, speaking to you, I think I remember you having a specific story about going to qualify at the rifle range.
Yeah, I had several different experiences, but I am competitive to the nth degree. So in basic, I wouldn't run with the women's company. I ran with the men. And I even passed out one time because I overheated and woke up with my drill sergeant in my face, telling me not to run with the men. And the next time we ran, I ran with the men again because I wasn't going to be defeated. What Scott's referring to is I shoot experts. I'm an ex-cop. I was in the military before, so I was very familiar by the time I got to Fort Benning, the home of the infantry, HUA, if you can imagine that. And I go out to the range, and there's a lot of sergeant majors and command sergeant majors out there, and I'm a female and a JAG officer. You could imagine what they thought about me. They're like, oh, this is going to be comedy central. So, the range master comes out and he hands me the weapon and he's like, so there's going to be some targets pop up and you should try to knock them down as they pop up. And I'm thinking, okay. And so I've got a crowd behind me. I have a whole audience behind me because they're going to get the best I've ever gotten watching this female JAG officer try to knock these targets down. So the whistle goes off. I've got my ear protection, my eye protection on, and I am laying those targets down as they pop up. And, there's complete silence, and I even, when he handed me the weapon, I was like, should I hold it like this? If you're going to treat me like a woman, let's play the game. And I felt like a pool shark, pulling somebody in because it's like, this dude is really out of his league. And so when it was over, he comes up and I take my ear protection off and he goes, ma'am, you're a ringer. And I was like, never assume, Sergeant, never assume. So I walked back through the whole gang of sergeant majors and command sergeant majors. And one asked me, he said, ma'am, are you married? And I said, no. He said, because I was going to tell him, don't mess with her, dead on. And so it was fun. It was great. And, those were the challenges. I had to score to Scott's statements. I had to score 100% on everything, especially at the home of the infantry. I was an officer and I was a female and I was a JAG officer. So I literally would starve myself so I didn't have to be taped because I'm an officer. And I'd make 100% on the run, on the push-ups, on the sit-ups, because I had to have that standard. So that's my story.
So there was a question in the chat. Basically, the message that women got in the military was they had to be twice as good to be considered equal. And Jessica and Joanna, I'm curious if you experienced that. You have to be twice as good as a man to be considered equal. Jessica, we'll start with you. Did you experience anything like that when you were?
Well, for me, I definitely noticed that. And because I was not the strongest and not the fastest, what I had to really find out really quickly during my training is how I could use the gifts that I did have to rise up in leadership. And so for me, because I'm not competitive, because I'm not, have that urge to win all the time, what I had to find out was how can I still be impactful and what we call a force magnifier with the gifts that I do have. And so for me, I recognized really quickly that I did have a really strong mindset. And so that was really helpful for me in encouraging other people to not get discouraged when they felt like, especially the females, when they felt like they weren't getting the recognition, or they felt like they weren't going to make it. And then the second part that I really recognized that I was really good at was building community and like encouraging community within our platoon. And through those things is how I was able to kind of be in leadership without necessarily being the fastest or the quickest. And I was an all right shot, even at the rifle range. But in my new job that I'm in now in the Arizona National Guard, we're non-combatant, so we don't carry weapons. So I'm really glad that I don't have to worry about qualifying on an M16 anymore.
Joanna, what about you? I know the Marine Corps is probably the most competitive and the most, masculine. So did you experience kind of the same?
Definitely. I remember specifically PFT time. And so
Real quick, the PFT is the physical fitness test for those of you.
Yeah. And so when you're getting ready to go out there, it's like your company or your whole squadron or, whoever has to go out and qualify, you're set up so you can hear everybody talking. And most people are like kind of pointing out people and wagering, who's going to come in last, who's going to have to get on a vehicle. And so having heard that, all the time in the background, and seeing people be, it makes you, definitely never want to put yourself in that place. And so it made me probably overtrain a lot, not eat very well, and take think like I had I had my two sons while serving. And so knowing that I was pregnant and already stigmatized and wanting to come out of pregnancy at the gate 100%, there were a lot of unhealthy practices that I partook in, like taking RIP fuel or things of that nature, postpartum, just to compete. And so that definitely was a thing. Like you had to be above average if you were a woman Marine, or you were going to be talked about incessantly. And I never understood that because in the Marine Corps, there's far more men than there are women. Like it's even grossly more exaggerated in our branch of service being the smallest. And so there are a lot of men who don't, who are all the way down on the third tier. And nobody talks about them in that way at all. But if you're a woman, you're going to be talked about, even if you pass, but and then it's even worse if something's wrong with you, like some of the other ladies had expressed, like if you get sick or you have a sprained ankle. I know women who graduated boot camp on 2 broken ankles because they refused to tell people that. And so, yeah, it was very much competitive. And the same with in the Marine Corps, they send you to a lot of different schools. And so there's like the top female and then the top male of the class. And so, all the women are vying to be that top female, which could also make it a very stressful environment. So the competition was very serious, and how they categorize women in the Marine Corps was vicious. And so you didn't want to be in any category that wasn't in the top tier.
So I want to then ask you each, this is a little bit of a speculative question, but I think it might say a lot. I mean, things have changed, right? Like opportunities for women have expanded greatly in the military. They can now serve in nearly, every job, every unit. It's not like it was probably when you were all there. If you could go back in today, would you? Would you do that? And would you hope it would be more equal, a little less of these, sort of challenges that you feel like you faced just because you were a woman? Let's start with you, Signa.
Well, that's a great assumption that you can do different jobs, and you can, but I don't know that it's changed so dramatically for women. The thought process, I don't, that's not what I'm hearing from people that are in. It's kind of the same thing still happening, even though more opportunities are open to you. It's still, to some degree, not as severe, I guess, as when I was in there, but to some degree, It is, still some of those same, because it's society. It's a microcosm of society. So, until we reach that plane where people are just seen as human and just people, we won't get there. But would I do it again now? And I'm not this age. Yes, I would absolutely do it again. It was a good time. I reflect on it, even with the challenges, because life is a challenge. Even with the challenges, I reflect on it and I think good thoughts.
Let's go to then Jessica next, and we'll end with Joanna on this one.
So I actually did go back into the military after a 15-year break in service, as I mentioned earlier. And there was a few reasons for me going back in. I felt deeply called. So I'm in the chaplain candidate program with the Army, the Arizona National Guard. And one of the reasons I felt called to go back into the military had to do with the lack of chaplain representation for women. One of my battle buddies while I was in service was raped, and it has just deeply impacted my work in the community with women and men who've experienced military sexual trauma. And one of the things that she said to me that has stayed with me was that she didn't reach out to anybody because she couldn't find a female chaplain. And so that was one of the things that was a motivating factor for me to go in, as well as also wanting to be a part of the culture that's changing military sexual trauma. And since I have left the service the first time when I was in, there has been an increase in programs and support and change in protocol to address these types of situations. And here in Arizona, specifically, our highest ranking Arizona National Guard, two-star General Carrie Mullenbeck, she's a Major General Carrie Mullenbeck, is a female. And so for me, I am seeing in what I'm doing right now, I'm seeing great hope for female leadership. And when I'm at drill weekends, we have a command sergeant major in my unit, female. And so I'm seeing a lot of high-ranking women around me, which encourages and inspires me. So much so that when my 17-year-old daughter came to me and said she wanted to join the military, I felt hopeful that the military that she was stepping into, although we know it's not perfect, and of course, just like any organization has a lot of work to do, I felt good that I was able to tell my daughter, yes, honey, I think this is a great decision that you're making. And she has joined the Air National Guard, and she leaves for basic training on Tuesday.
That is a great segue. I want to go to Joanna on this question next, and then I'm going to ask you another question on that, Jessica. So Joanna, first, answer that last question for us about whether you would go back in today.
Yeah, I think even with all my traumatic experiences in the service, it was such a pivotal time in my life that I would never want to erase it. And I would definitely do it again if I had the chance. If I had the chance to do it again and being smarter about it, like Jessica has. And I'll tell you, I've been friends with Jess for many years. And when I saw the announcement that she was doing it, it just tickled me because I know her, and I know like that motivation under there was like, oh my God, this girl is going back and she's going to change some shit, and that's what I love about the women that I've served with is that we don't forget where we come from. We work really hard to make the changes and strides. And I'm so proud that her daughter is joining this service. And I even feel confident that, we're more aware as a society. And even though those problems still exist, and I'll tell you, it made me nervous if my daughter ever asked me back when she was growing up, and thankfully she never did. But I think it was probably because I was too open with her about my traumas that I sustained. And also the world has been topsy-turvy since they've grown up. But it does bring me hope. And I have a lot of women that I mentor that are still serving because I want to stay connected to that community. And I want to make sure that it's getting better. And they're reporting back, like they see us veteran women in advocacy. And so now they advocate for themselves in service. And so I've seen great strides specifically for women in the Marine Corps as it relates to weight standards that have grossly, debilitated women's lives post-service because of the standards that they're held to, especially women of color that come from different cultural environments and the things that they've had to sustain based on that kind of body morphia that you get in the military. And even that's changing. Like they have focus groups, they're bringing women in to make those changes, not bringing a bunch of men in to talk about us, so I am hopeful. But like Justin Signa said, we are a sector, we are a small visual of what's happening across the world, we're that example. And so all the things that we need to fix in the service are all the still things that we need to fix, in our nation. And so as we get better, it will only get better. And I'm hopeful that it will.
I appreciate all of your optimism. I want to end with a final question, and then we'll turn to a few audience questions. So two of you have now said you would, it sounds like, have different answers to your daughters if they asked you whether they wanted to go in today. What do each of you think still needs to change? What would you like to advocate for? And I mean, Jessica, you mentioned, sexual trauma. Joanna, you mentioned, women of color being in a specific position. I mean, what are some of the issues that you think still need to be addressed? Do you want to begin there, Signa?
Sure. The same things that are in society, I think, need to be addressed, just realizing that everybody is human and treating everybody as human beings. Jessica, hats off to you. One of my favorite people at Fort Benning was a female chaplain, and she was an amazing person, which I'm sure you are. But, just having the look-see when there are issues, because just as in society, in the military, you're that smaller sector of society, and you still do see those, issues of, sexual abuse and that sort of thing. They have to take those things seriously, and that has to be, fully investigated. And women need to know that they can report those things and be heard and justice be given to them. I did prosecute a military service member for raping another service member's child, and he was let off. And I'm sure, hopefully, that's not the case anymore. But one of the panelists, because that was the only one I lost, they put him out for something else. They would not convict him. And even the defense attorney came and said, you beat me all over that courtroom. But one of the panelists came to my office afterwards, and it was a high-ranking NCO, and he said, "Ma'am, we're going to put him out. We just wouldn't convict him." And that just tore me apart. That you knew he was guilty of the crime that we charged him with and we proved, but you're going to release him on society so he can further violate women. I hope that's got to change, and I hope it does change. But that was the situation while I was in it, and that was a pivotal moment that made me get out, because I'd lost honor there.
Wow. Let me turn to you, Joanna, next, and we'll end with Jessica on this one.
Can you restate the question again?
Wondering what it is that you think still needs to change going forward.
I think some of the things that they're doing as far as the integration piece is big. So keeping women and men separate, and then forcing them to have to work together when we're in these forever wars was not a good, idea to begin with. And in an all volunteer force, and knowing that women are capable physically and mentally to do any job in the military, I think that will fast track a lot of change. Because what was happening before is that they were like, okay, we're going to flood women into the service, but then they can only get these types of roles. And so then you're still looked at as kind of like a subset, not really fully integrated. So now that we're flooding into the combat roles, now that we have full opportunity to participate in all these different units, I think as that grows and the population of women grow to serve, it will only improve. But that also means that those women have to have the same opportunity to excel and be put in leadership positions. I served from 1998 until 2007, and I never had a woman leader over me, never. They were either my peers or one rank, below me or above me, as we were both working our ways up. But I never had a woman that I could turn to. And a lot of the trauma that I had, I really could have used women leadership. And I think that's something that the military should focus on, and where they place people, and ensuring that there's representation for your entire unit at your unit and not isolated. And then another example of that is when I came back from the war in Iraq, if you're going to sustain a career, you take a B billet, and I was put on recruiting duty. And then again, I was sent to a state off, kind of post command, away from like the military industrial complex. And I was one woman in a unit of 60 recruiting men who had all come from infantry units who were not really supervised. And so it was a very scary time for me, just in that setting. And so there are a lot of spaces that we don't think about in the military that are not just, getting ready to deploy and go to war, that we need to ensure that there's representation and somebody, an ally, everywhere that you are. And then obviously the legislation and the protocol that takes what crimes do happen in the military out of the hands of commanders. That to me just doesn't make any sense, because we already know there's a lot of nepotism and things that are happening in the United States military that doesn't, fare well when it comes for adjudication processes. And so those are issues that are still being fought through legislation. But I think that's why we need to share more of our veteran stories with the American populace, because I think they just hear about the military and veterans and kind of the hero arc, and they're just told, thank you for your service and honor us. But we have real problems, and problems that they could help us fix faster if they're engaged with what needs to be happen legislatively for our lives to improve in the service.
Really interesting. All right. And Jessica, final word on this one, and then we'll turn to Scott with a few audience questions.
Well, I think Joanna and Signa basically covered everything that I would say regarding representation. And as Joanna was speaking about, the legislation that changes the protocol for crimes that happen and taking it out of the chain of command. I just remember in Iraq, it was an all-male command staff while we were there. And it was a difficult deployment. And I think that having a female represented in our leadership, I think would have been important in some of the challenges that occurred while we were deployed. It's a miserable deployment to begin with, especially when I was there back in 2003 when things had first started. And so just representation, and as I mentioned earlier, I currently am seeing great representation of women in high-ranking leadership roles. And my daughter, she chose a job as a hydraulic systems maintenance for aircraft, and in her shop, a lot of men, and she's going to be surrounded probably by a lot of men, maybe because women may not necessarily care for that field. I don't know what it might be, but she's absolutely interested in it. And so I hope that by her going into this shop and sharing with her friends what she's doing, and her bigger dream of being a pilot, and this being a pathway for her, I hope that her story, and even my story is, Hispanic women in the military, I do try to share on social media what I'm doing, mostly because we have to see it. And if we don't see it, we don't know what's possible. And so as I have young nieces and nephews and godchildren, that are watching what I'm doing, I want them to see what's possible.
All right, so I'm going to address a couple of questions in the chat. One of them is from Jennifer. Jennifer, she says she served in the Air Force and she didn't really have the same experience. She says that she thinks it's branch dependent. So Jennifer, I wonder if you'd be willing to share your experience with us, because I admit we don't have an Air Force member on the panel.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay. I joined the Air Force in 1987, and I recently retired this year. So I spent 34 years in the Air Force, and in the Air National Guard here in Arizona. And I joined at 18, and it was a culture shock. I was the first one in my family to join the military, so I had no real background. And it was hard, and you struggle, but I never felt that I had to prove myself to anyone. It was always a competition with myself to pass my PT test or to accomplish whatever tasks or jobs that I had to do. I've seen inappropriate behavior and that mentality from men, but it was never anything that me or my peers took as something that was holding us down. And maybe I was lucky. Maybe I had great peers and great experiences. I've had women supervisors, I've had men supervisors. I just retired from the 161st at Sky Harbor Airport, and they have their first woman wing commander. Colonel Hastings started out in the Army and joined the Air Force as an enlisted member, became a pilot, and now she's the wing commander for the whole entire wing. Like Jessica mentioned, General Muhlenbeck, I've deployed with her when she was a lieutenant. And so I've experienced these great women that showed how great the Air Force can be and is. And I would do it again. And I would encourage other people to do it again. I'm not going to blindly let people, join the military. That's the best thing to do. No, you need to figure out what it is you want to do. And you need to go in there with open eyes. You need to verify anything anyone tells you. And you need to make this a great career. It's not dependent on anyone else. So I think a lot of it might be, the Marines seem to have a very different mentality. The Army has a very different mentality. There's also no one here from the Navy. So I think you have to take everything, like always, with a grain of salt. Also, things have changed, things have improved. I sat on a disciplinary board, kind of like with Sigma said, we chose not to convict because based on the evidence that was provided to us, we did not have that ability. And same thing, they chose to not retain this person and they kicked him out of the military. But when you go into a legal proceeding, you can make a decision only based on what they present to you. We knew the truth. We knew what had happened. But you can't make your decision based on outside influences. So I see it and I understand it. And I think, I do agree that maybe the commanders do not have a place in disciplinary decisions. Not because of nepotism or anything else like that, but because their main concern is their unit. They're looking out for their unit and how it reflects on them. So that's
I appreciate your input, Jennifer. I think it is important to mention that everybody has distinct experiences in the military. Every branch is different. Every unit is different. Even, different platoons within the same company, within the same battalion are different. And it's important to acknowledge that, the experience of the military is not universal. But, you know, the other question I wanted to address that came from the chat, and it does have to do, again, with being a woman in the armed forces. But, you know, there is that competitive mindset that you kind of have to have with yourself. You know, going forward the rest of your life, can any of you say that that competitive mindset, whether you're competing with yourself or competing with the others in your unit, has that impacted your mental health? You know, how do you address that now that you've been out for a while? And I'll start with Joanna, because again, I think you can exemplify.
Yeah, so when I first got out, it was unexpected. I had been diagnosed with the disease. I had intended on retiring from the Marine Corps and continuing my career. But because I was diagnosed with DVT and dependent on medication, my exit at 10 years was unexpected, unplanned, and I really had, you know, no resources. And so at that time, I was a staff sergeant E6. I had just come back from Iraq. So I had a host of issues that I was working through. And I decided that since I needed a job right away, the best gateway for me would to kind of go into government, you know, employment. And I applied for, I worked in communications. I was a recruiter. Somehow I found a job description in Chandler that would have me working in the city courts. And it was a government job. So I thought, you know, score, I'm in there. What I didn't realize and what I wasn't prepared for was it was literally working in an environment that I had never been in my entire life. It was all women. It was very casual. They had their kind of work processes, and that was what you followed. But for me, I just couldn't function that way. I was like, well, I can work this docket faster. I can finish this paperwork in an hour. It doesn't take that long. And so here I was trying to do everything like I did in the military, get the job done, move on to the next mission. And people were like, oh, we don't do that here. This is a court, everything's on a schedule and you're working too far ahead and it was very difficult for me to adjust. And so in that I learned, okay, this is not obviously the kind of environment that I need to be in. And so haphazardly, that had to help me find the space where I could use that inner competitive fuel that I have. And really that's what kind of led me into a problem solving, because I really couldn't find this civilian place for me. And then I was meeting other veterans that were having all the same problems I was having. And that's how I fell into advocacy. And then I started to learn how to use that strength and that determination to advocate for myself and for others. And then when I hit the roadblocks there and realized, well, these people are all lying to us too, I've got to find the root and it's got to go in legislation. Then I, went into that vein. And then people were like, well, you should run for office. And it's like, you're a leader. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm someone who wants to make the world better. I don't have an ego and I want to bring everybody along with me. And I can't do that as just like this figurehead. I'm a boots on the ground gal. I want to get dirty. And if I'm in the front, I'm in the front. If I'm not in the front, I'm not in the front, but my voice is going to be loud and you're going to hear it. And that's something that the military really fostered in me. And joke's on them, because I'm going to use it to make everything better, especially the military. And I'm just, yeah, that's my answer.
All right. Well, thank you, Joanna. Lauren, I'm going to toss it off.
Yes, I will have to leave it there. We're about out of time here. I could keep going, and I'm sure Scott has more questions for you. We didn't get to every audience question. What a wonderful discussion. So much I appreciate about all of your perspectives and your stories. Thank you so much for sharing and for doing this with us. Thank you to Scott for producing the podcast, and of course for lending your perspective and expertise today. And thank you to all of you for joining us. Thank you for being a wonderful audience, and hopefully we'll be able to do these things in person again one day. But nice to have you all here. Thank you again.
So
Linda,
before you all go, we do have a raffle. And I also want to say, from a personal perspective, I want to thank our panelists and many of you who have joined us. And Scott, you as well. Thank you for serving our country. Thank you for
giving me the opportunity to tell these stories.
Yeah, we are so very grateful for all of you and your service. Thank you. We have 2 raffles to give away today. One is a family pass to the Botanical Gardens, and Pam Koopman, you have won that. And so we want to make sure that we get that to you. And then we also have a Phoenix Museum, Art Museum membership. So it's for a full year. And Olivia Homewood, you have won that. So we'll make sure and reach back out to you. I also want to thank you all for joining Women in Our Community. Thank you, Scott, for all you're doing for Here Arizona. And again, thank you for joining us, our panelists and our guests. And we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
bye. Thank you so much.